In the early 1900s, Tulsa, Oklahoma was booming. Oil money was flowing, businesses were rising, and the city was full of dreams. But in the middle of this white-dominated city, something incredible was growing, a neighborhood that would soon be known around the world. Its name was Greenwood. To outsiders, it looked like just another part of town, but to the black community, it was a symbol of hope, pride, and determination. Greenwood was home to thousands of African Americans who had come to Tulsa, searching for opportunity, and against all odds, they found it. You could walk down Greenwood Avenue and see the heartbeat of success. Shiny barbershops, busy restaurants, clothing stores, movie theaters, and even luxury hotels, all owned and run by black entrepreneurs. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, and business owners filled the streets with confidence and purpose. People called it Black Wall Street, and they were right. Greenwood wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. In a time when racism and segregation ruled the country, this community built something powerful with their own hands. Imagine walking through those streets in the 1920s, children laughing on their way to school, jazz music echoing from small clubs at night, and shopkeepers greeting neighbors by name. Families lived with dignity, surrounded by the rewards of their hard work. There was pride in every brick, every sign, every smile. But just across the railroad tracks, in the white part of Tulsa, the story was very different. While Greenwood's businesses grew richer, many white residents watched with bitterness. They couldn't stand to see black families driving cars, owning land, and living better than them. And in a time when racial hatred was still part of everyday life, envy quickly turned into anger. The newspapers didn't help either. They often ignored Greenwood's success or twisted it into something threatening. White Tulsa refused to see black progress as something to celebrate. Instead, they saw it as a challenge to their power, their status, and their beliefs. Still, inside Greenwood, people kept building. They believed that if they stayed united, worked hard, and followed the law, nothing could destroy what they had created. They believed in the American dream, that success was possible for anyone willing to work for it. For a while, that dream felt real. Greenwood was one of the wealthiest black communities in the entire United States. The people there had built their own schools, their own hospitals, and their own businesses without any help from the outside world. They had done the impossible, created a city within a city. But what no one in Greenwood could have known was that their success, the very thing that made them proud, would soon become the reason for their destruction. Across town, hate was building like a storm waiting to break. Whispers and jealousy were spreading through white Tulsa. It only needed one spark to ignite the fire. As the sun set over Greenwood that final peaceful evening, families sat down to dinner, children played outside, and shopkeepers closed up for the night, unaware that everything they had worked for was about to vanish. They didn't know it yet, but they were standing at the edge of one of the darkest chapters in American history, a story the world would try to forget, but one that must never be forgotten. The success of Greenwood was impossible to ignore. Every day, more cars rolled through its clean streets, more shops opened, and more families moved in. It was proof that the black community could rise, even in the face of hate and inequality. But across the railroad tracks in white Tulsa, that success looked like something else. It looked like a threat. For many white residents, the idea of black men and women living better lives than them was unbearable. They watched as Greenwood flourished, and deep inside, jealousy turned into resentment. At the time, America was still a country built on segregation, a system designed to keep black people in their place. And Greenwood's success broke that rule. Whispers started, conversations in white-owned bars, in churches, and even in offices began to carry the same bitter tone. How did they do it? Some asked. They're getting too proud, others said. And slowly, those words began to spread like smoke before a fire. The local newspapers didn't help. Instead of celebrating Greenwood, they painted it as suspicious, as if success among black citizens was somehow dangerous. Headlines twisted stories, rumors became facts, and fear turned into hate. Meanwhile, inside Greenwood, life went on. People were proud, hardworking, and united. Most didn't believe that the hate from the other side of town could reach them. They had faith that their achievements spoke louder than the color of their skin. They had built churches, schools, and businesses. They had done everything right. But the tension in the air was getting heavier. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was anger, and that anger began to find new targets. White organizations like the Ku Klux Klan were growing across the South, and Tulsa wasn't immune. Men gathered in secret meetings, speaking about teaching lessons and keeping order. In their minds, Greenwood was becoming a challenge to white supremacy, and that was something they couldn't tolerate. The divide between the two sides of the city was no longer just physical, it was emotional, cultural, and explosive. Two different worlds, separated by a single set of train tracks, living under completely different rules. By 1921, Tulsa was a city ready to burst, one side full of pride and progress, the other full of fear and hate. And in that kind of atmosphere, all it would take was one small event, one single misunderstanding, to turn everything to ash. People in Greenwood could feel that something was wrong. Business owners talked in quiet voices. Mothers warned their children not to cross into the white part of town. And pastors prayed for peace. But no one could have imagined just how quickly that peace would shatter. Because in just a few short days, one false accusation, one newspaper headline, and one angry mob would erase an entire community from the map. As the sun set over Tulsa that spring evening, the city seemed calm on the surface, but beneath that calm, hate was moving, silent, unseen, and unstoppable. The world was about to witness one of the darkest tragedies in American history, and it all began with a single moment inside a small metal elevator. It was May 30th, 1921, a warm spring afternoon in Tulsa, Oklahoma. People were going about their day, shopkeepers counting money, children playing in the dusty streets, and workers heading home after a long day. No one knew that in just a few hours, their world would change forever. In downtown Tulsa, a 19-year-old black man named Dick Rowland stepped into an elevator at the Drexel building. He was a shoe shiner, polite, quiet, and known by everyone in the neighborhood. Inside that elevator was a young white woman named Sarah Page. The elevator operator. In 01 knows exactly what happened next. Some say Dick tripped and accidentally grabbed her arm to steady himself. Others say the elevator jolted, causing Sarah to scream. Whatever the truth was, that brief moment, just a few seconds, would set off a chain reaction of lies, fear, and hate that would destroy everything Greenwood had built. Sarah's scream echoed through the building. A nearby clerk ran to help, and by the time anyone understood what had happened, rumors had already started. By that evening, people were saying a black man had attacked a white woman. The story grew with every retelling, twisting facts into something monstrous. The next morning, the local newspaper, the Tulsa Tribune, printed a headline that would ignite a city. It accused Dick Rowland of assault and hinted that a lynching might take place that very night. The paper didn't need to give orders. Its words were enough to light the fuse. Within hours, white men began gathering outside the courthouse where Dick was being held. They were armed, some with rifles, others with torches. Shouting filled the streets, "String him up." It wasn't just anger anymore, it was hate, burning and alive. When the people of Greenwood heard what was happening, fear turned into determination. Many had seen lynchings before. They knew what was coming, and this time, they weren't going to stand by and watch one of their own be killed. A group of around 75 armed black men, some of them World War I veterans, decided to march to the courthouse. They came not to fight, but to protect. They told the sheriff, "We're here to make sure Dick Rowland isn't lynched." The sheriff assured them he had things under control, so they left. But rumors spread fast. White Tulsa took their presence as a challenge. "Black men are coming with guns," they shouted. Anger exploded like fire on gasoline. Later that night, the group from Greenwood returned again to check if Dick was still safe. Tension filled the air. Hundreds of armed white men now surrounded the courthouse. As the black group prepared to leave, a white man stepped forward and tried to grab one of their guns. A struggle followed, and then a single gunshot That one sound echoed through downtown Tulsa like thunder, and in that instant, chaos began. The white mob opened fire. The men from Greenwood fired back. Within minutes, the streets were filled with shouting, gunfire, and panic. What started with a scream inside a small elevator had now become a war between two sides of the same city, a war born from lies, fear, and hatred. As the night fell over Tulsa, the sound of that single bullet still hung in the air, a signal that the world would never forget, and Greenwood would never recover from what was coming next. Night had fallen over Tulsa. The city was silent, but only for a moment. Then, gunfire shattered the darkness. What started outside the courthouse had now spread into the heart of the city. White mobs began marching toward Greenwood, hundreds of them, armed and furious. Some carried torches, others carried rifles. They were no longer looking for justice. They were looking for blood. As they crossed the railroad tracks, the line that separated white Tulsa from black Tulsa disappeared, and with that, the massacre began. Shots echoed through the streets. Storefronts shattered. Families woke up to screams and flames. Men, women, and children ran for their lives as bullets tore through their homes. From the hills above Greenwood, some white residents began firing rifles down into the neighborhood. The sound was endless, like thunder rolling through the night. The people of Greenwood tried to fight back. Some hid in basements, others grabbed whatever weapons they could find, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. By dawn, chaos ruled the streets. Flames lit up the sky orange, red, and black. Entire blocks were burning. Churches, schools, businesses, everything people had worked for was turning to ash. And then came something no one expected. Airplanes. Witnesses later said that planes flew low over Greenwood, dropping burning turpentine balls and shooting from above. The fire spread faster. Explosions ripped through the streets. It was the first time in American history that a city was bombed from the air by its own people. Mothers clutched their children, running through smoke so thick they could barely see. Men tried to carry the wounded, but the fire chased them from every corner. Those who couldn't escape were trapped. Within hours, the richest black community in America was gone. Over 1,200 homes destroyed. More than 30 city blocks wiped off the map. Everything gone. The National Guard was finally called in, but not to protect Greenwood, to arrest its survivors. Black residents who tried to defend themselves were rounded up at gunpoint, lined up on the streets, and marched to makeshift camps. Their city burned behind them while they stood helpless, watching their dreams collapse into ashes. By the time the sun rose, Greenwood was unrecognizable. The proud streets, once filled with laughter and jazz, were now silent, covered in smoke, dust, and death. Bodies lay in the open. Families searched for each other among the ruins. The smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, mixed with grief that words could never describe. No one knows exactly how many people were killed that night. Some say 100. Others believe it was far more. But one thing was certain: an entire community had been erased, and the world turned away. No newspapers told the truth. No justice came. For decades, the massacre was left out of history books, buried like the people who died in it. What began as one false accusation had become one of the darkest days in American history. The story of Greenwood, once a city of hope and pride, was now a story of destruction and silence. But even through the ashes, the spirit of Greenwood refused to die. Because you can burn buildings, but you can't burn the truth. When the smoke finally cleared, Tulsa was quiet again. But it wasn't peace, it was silence. The kind of silence that follows after everything you love has been taken from you. Where once stood a thriving community, now there was nothing but ashes. The proud streets of Greenwood, once called Black Wall Street, had been wiped from the earth. Families wandered through the ruins, searching for loved ones, for homes, for anything that survived the fire. Most found nothing. The numbers told a story too big to believe. More than 1,000 homes destroyed, dozens of churches and schools gone, hundreds of businesses erased, and the people, they were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the pain in their hearts. The city of Tulsa did not rush to help. Insurance companies refused to pay, calling the destruction a riot instead of a massacre. The police arrested black survivors, not the attackers. And white Tulsa carried on, pretending nothing had happened, for decades. The truth was buried under lies and silence. Children grew up not knowing what their parents had lived through. Teachers skipped the story in classrooms. The government never apologized. And so, for almost a century, the story of Greenwood became a ghost, whispered about, but never told aloud. But the people of Greenwood, they refused to disappear. Even after losing everything, they started again. Brick by brick, they rebuilt homes, reopened shops, and tried to bring life back to their streets. They had no money, no support, but they had pride. The same pride that built Greenwood the first time. And though the world forgot them, their spirit didn't fade. Because Greenwood was never just a place. It was an idea that even in the face of hate, hope can survive. Decades later, survivors and their descendants began to speak. They told their stories that America could no longer ignore. And slowly, the silence began to break. Today, the memory of the Tulsa Massacre stands as one of the darkest reminders of what hate can do, but also in what strength truly means. Across the world, people now know the name Greenwood. They see it not just as a tragedy, but as a lesson, a reminder that progress must be protected, that truth must be told, and that silence is never an option. In 2021, 100 years after the massacre, Tulsa finally began to acknowledge what had happened. Memorials were built, documentaries were made, and survivors, some over 100 years old, finally got the chance to tell the world what they saw. Their voices shook, but they spoke with courage. Because after a century of silence, Greenwood was finally being heard. And maybe that's what justice looks like. Not revenge, but remembrance. Not hate, but truth. The story of Greenwood is not just Black history, it's American history, it's human history, and it reminds us that no matter how dark the night gets, there will always be people willing to stand in the fire and rebuild. The ashes of Greenwood became the soil for something stronger, a voice that cannot be silenced again. Because history may try to forget, but the voices of the past will always find their way back.